Well, welcome to Tim's Take, and today we have a very, very special guest. This is my boss, so let's be good here. This is Dr. Shibu Jose. He is currently the Associate Dean for Research in the College of Agriculture, Food, and Natural Resources, but you also have another even bigger title, Director of the Ag Experiment Station, and that's where we fall in under this. Now, but Shibu, tell us about yourself.
Okay, thank you, Tim. I appreciate, first of all, this opportunity to join the famous Tim's Take. So appreciate it.
Just took 2 years for it to get you here.
So I grew up on a small farm in India. It was my grandma's farm. Very small. If you look at the small farm definition for the U.S., this farm, you won't even call it a farm because it's third of an acre. That's what it was. But it was an agroforestry farm. That means we had trees, we had timber trees, nut trees, fruit trees, you name it. We also had some spice trees, but we also had coconut palms. We had a little bit of rice paddy and a milking cow, and so it's a small farm that fits the definition of a tropical home garden agroforest. So I'll tell you a story about how I really got interested in like agriculture and forestry and soils. So when I was in 5th grade, government of India had this program called social forestry, trying to promote tree planting on farms. Of course, our farm had plenty of trees to begin with, but still, I brought this tiny seedling that I got from school, a seedling of a very precious tree called sandalwood. And it is called liquid gold because the oil extracted from sandalwood is used to make perfumes, and so it's highly valuable. I knew that much at least, so I brought the tiny seedling home, and I wanted to plant it in a very special place because it is a very special species, right? It's a very special tree. So I found the only place where we didn't have any trees, that is kind of the front yard. Cannot call it a driveway because we didn't have a car, or it's not a driveway, it's the front yard, a tiny space where we didn't have any trees or any plants for that matter. So I found the perfect spot right in the middle of that, and I was about to plant this tiny seedling, and my grandma came to me and asked, "What are you doing?" And I said, "Grandma, this is a very special tree called sandalwood, and I want to plant it right here." And Grandma said, "No, you cannot plant it here." And I asked her why. And she said, "No, this tiny plant needs a mother." And I was looking at Grandma, and I told her, "Grandma, no, you're pulling my leg." And she said, "No, I'm not. It needs a mommy." Then I asked her why, and she said, "Oh, it needs a mom to nourish her, to nurse, this, not her, nourish it, to take care of it." And I claimed to Grandma that no, she didn't know anything. And of course, Grandma only had a 4th grade schooling, and I was in 5th grade, so I felt like I was at least a grade above her. But Grandma finally convinced me that I needed to plant that tiny seedling near another big tree, and that big tree would become its mom and would take care of that tiny seedling. Of course, Grandma won, and I made, that choice to plant it near another big tree, and time passed by, and it was not until I was a senior in college that I learned what Grandma was trying to teach me. Of course, she didn't know the ecology or the physiology behind any of it, but she knew, based on the traditional knowledge that had been transferred to her from generation to generation, that the sandalwood needed a mom. And I learned in college that sandalwood is what we call a hemi-root parasite. It puts its roots into the roots of these bigger plants. And that's how it gets its water and its nutrients more efficiently. Poor grandma didn't know the scientific facts, but she knew it needed a mom.
The power of observation.
The power of observation, not by her or by herself, but passed on to her through generations. Maybe she learned that on her own too, I don't know. But grandma knew quite a bit. I always appreciated how much she knew after I studied some of these things in college. And I could then figure out how good she was in putting the right species in the right place for the right reasons, creating that home garden agroforestry farm for the family. Of course, that led me to pursue my degree from the Kerala Agricultural University, and I gravitated more towards forestry and learned quite a bit, came to the U.S., had the opportunity to study agroforestry, trying to put multiple species together as a farm unit, just like the way my grandma was managing our tiny farm. Then I learned how difficult it was. I was just trying to put two species together, corn and black walnut in Indiana, trying to create an alley cropping system. And similarly, soybean and also black walnut. We had another species, red oak. So that was the combination, either corn or soybean with either black walnut or red oak, two valuable tree species, mixing them together with two valuable crops, corn and soybean, so important for the Midwest. Then I learned how difficult it was. But then I appreciated even more the knowledge that my grandma had in putting, the rice and the coconut palms and the trees and the animals all together on a tiny piece of land. But I learned the scientific principles and spent a career investigating how crops and trees interact. How can we make them a sustainable system on the same piece of land?
And there at Purdue, you really emphasized soils too, didn't you?
Exactly. I was looking at the below ground interactions, root to root interactions when you put these crops and trees together. Because of course you will suspect that the trees being bigger, they would compete so heavily with corn or soybean. But that's not necessarily true. When the trees are younger, the crops can compete even more vigorously with those young tiny seedlings. So if you don't alleviate that competition early on, the trees don't have a chance to survive. But as the trees grow, of course they put a lot more roots, and that competition becomes more intense than for water and for nutrients with the crops. And then the crops will suffer. And if you don't take care of that competition for light, for water, for nutrients, then you won't have a crop. Corn, being a C4 plant, doesn't have a chance under shade. But through my research, I showed that, yes, of course, that reduces yield somewhat, but the competition below ground, in the soil, for water and nutrients, that was the key in making that system work. So what we did was we alleviated that by trenching on both sides of the trees, that way separating the root systems of the trees from that of the corn or soybean. And then, of course, we saw the yield come back, just like the monoculture outside of the alley cropping. So we proved that, the below ground competition was so important in the sustainability of that system in the long run.
What I like about that, it's the basic physiology, but also the production and getting into the soil also, that it put it all together.
Yes, it is putting it all together, but not just the agronomics or the physiology of the crops or the trees, but also the economics. Because by the end of the day, farmers should make money out of farming.
And we forget that sometimes, don't we? It's easy to get so involved in our science that we forget that there is a return on that investment.
Yeah, so agroforestry as a system with multiple species put together, the beauty of that is, let's say crop prices are low for one crop, then you have another crop that may somehow give you that buffer, or your trees are still growing, and one day you will reap the benefit of growing a woody component as part of your farm. So it has multiple benefits.
There's an early, and then there's a medium, maybe where both are growing well, the crops and the trees. But then there's that mature, where your trees are going to be your wood product or your nut product or such.
That is true. That is true. And you may also get to a point where the shading is so intense that you may not be able to grow a crop underneath. You may want to convert that to a pasture at that point.
Right.
So you have to figure out what's your end goal, what's your intention in creating a system like that. In my grandma's case, of course, it worked. We had all these things. If you go back there, of course, my grandma passed away in 1991, but the farm is still there, and we don't have any rice anymore, but we still have pretty much all the trees, and you'll see bananas growing in the underneath, under the shade, and all kinds of other annuals and perennials under these big trees.
That's so interesting that everything was planted for a reason and where it was planted.
Yep. We never bought. As far as I can remember, we got almost all our fruits from our small, tiny farm. Pineapples, bananas, mangoes, you name it, we had it on our farm.
Someone said, well, that's a tropical to subtropical climate, but you can do that on temperate climates too.
You can.
It's different, but you can.
You can. If you have a small farm, if you want to diversify, it is a possibility. Or even on a large farm, if you want to, try some other high-value crops. And you've seen the work of the Center for Agroforestry and elderberry or Chinese chestnuts or even pecans or black walnuts. There are all sorts of opportunities available out there.
But there's 5 different parts of agroforestry?
Yes, 5 major practices of agroforestry.
Yes.
Yeah.
What are those?
Well, alley cropping, the one that I studied, is one. Of course, silver pasture is perhaps the fastest growing agroforestry practice in the U.S. and you have windbreaks. That's how in the United States we really got started in agroforestry in a big way, because following the Dust Bowl, you remember all the tree plantings in the Great Plains in particular, and so windbreaks became our first formal agroforestry practice in the 30s and 40s. And riparian buffers, that's another major practice, protecting the water bodies, and the last one is forest farming. Essentially, a similar concept to that of the tropical home garden where I grew up. You have the forest, or you have the trees, and then you have the clearings or openings underneath where you try to grow other crops. And so those are the 5 major practices. There is a 6th one that is becoming also common these days: urban food forests. And so it's almost like an extension of the urban agriculture.
Well, after you got your MS and PhD at Purdue, you went on to Florida.
That's right. I started my faculty career at Florida, but there was a short period before that I went to Minnesota as a postdoc. And I had the pleasure of working with some really well-renowned ecologists on the prairie ecosystem. So when I think about my training, that's why, I call myself, like an ecologist, broadly trained ecologist, but primarily in the below ground processes as a soil scientist, like you said earlier. Why? Because, of course, if you go back and look at my undergraduate degree, I did a thesis looking at soils, comparing the prairie soils with forest soils. And fast forward, even as part of my master's and PhD, I looked into soils and nutrients in plants and interactions, and then, of course, used some of those skills when I went to Minnesota as a postdoc. And there we looked at, what happens if there is increased CO2 in the atmosphere? What happens if there is increased nitrogen deposition? What will happen to the prairies that we have? So I studied a lot of the grassland species there. But after 8 months, I had the pleasure of packing up everything and moving down to the sunny Florida, where I was at a farm, University of Florida's West Florida, REC, Research and Education Center, and where I taught and did research. And so, of course, I studied a lot of the southern variants of agroforestry. That was one of my interests. And so I looked into cotton, because cotton was a major crop. And so in Indiana, I had the pleasure of studying corn and soybean. Back home, I grew up with rice, and in Minnesota, I studied the prairie, grassland, species, and then at Florida, I had the pleasure of looking at some of the southern crops like cotton and peanuts, and how do you grow them with some woody perennials like pecan, because pecan orchards used to be very common in the northwest part of Florida. So that's what I was trying to look at. How can you make use of all this space in between the pecan trees? Can you grow cotton or can you grow peanut? And pines are also so important to the economy of the South. And I particularly like this longleaf pine, the long-needled pine. And so I started working with longleaf pine. And again, trying to combine longleaf pine with cotton and peanuts and creating that kind of a system so that landowners can make income, even if they are trying to restore longleaf, trying to establish a pine plantation. Can they earn an income from the very beginning itself from their cotton or peanut, rather than waiting for 15 years to harvest these trees? Can you grow something in between? And of course, it's not always possible. I will admit it. I'll be the first one to admit. But in some systems like the pecan orchard, when you are planting those trees 60 feet apart, there is a lot of space that you can utilize early in the establishment phase, maybe for the first 10 years.
Sure.
And you are using that space wisely for cotton or peanut. And so those were the kind of agroforestry practices that I worked with while I was at Florida. But I was also interested in silvopasture, so I started working on silvopasture because there is a lot of cattle, as you can imagine, in Florida.
Yeah, so people think of Florida as a vacation destination, but it's a huge agricultural.
It is. Ag is big, and just like here in Missouri, in Florida too.
Right, yeah. And not just our subtropicals like oranges, but it's like you mentioned, the major crops, peanuts and cotton and even soybeans.
And cattle and soybeans.
Livestock, yes. Well, you must have did pretty good because they asked you to come up to Missouri to head our agroforestry.
That is right. I think my experience working with the diverse systems of agroforestry obviously caught the attention of some of the folks here. So I started getting calls about this opportunity to come and lead the best temperate agroforestry center in the world. I'm so proud that we have that in our college, College of Agriculture, Food and Natural Resources. As you know, they just hosted the 19th North American Agroforestry Conference last week,
right,
with over 200 people attending. So this is by far the best temperate agroforestry program in the whole world. And it was even back then.
And about 2009, is that when you came?
2009. So I got a call from the founding director, Dr. Gene Garrett, informing me about this wonderful opportunity and the fact that he was about to retire and they were about to open the search and there was going to be a huge endowment, and it was going to be an endowed chair professorship and everything was attractive. And I had just become a full professor at the University of Florida at that point, and we had just built our house about a year before that.
And you had two little boys.
And you're right. Before I moved here, my younger son was just born. But we made that decision to move because it seemed like a wonderful opportunity first to come to the University of Missouri and to a very well-known center. Back then we called it a signature program in the college. Now it is what we call a program of distinction in our college, but also an endowed chair professorship. That was something very attractive. So I came in as the director of the center and the Garrett endowed chair professor. And so it was a great time.
But you also must have made an impression because then they asked you to lead an even bigger organization with the School of Natural Resources.
I had the fortune, I would say, yes. After being the director of the center, and also, you may recall, Tim, I also held the role as the superintendent.
Oh, that's right.
Of the horticulture and agroforestry farm for about 5-6 years. And so I had a number of, leadership experiences, I would say. And when the time came and they were looking for a new director for the School of Natural Resources, I applied for it. And I applied, and it was a national search, and luckily I was one of the finalists. And to make a long story short, I was offered the job, and I took it. But I felt like, after serving agroforestry for, at that point, about 7.5 to 8 years, it was time for me to maybe move on to another leadership opportunity. And it was a wonderful, wonderful opportunity for me to lead the School of Natural Resources as its director.
Because again, it's even more diversified. Now you've got fisheries, but you've got what you love too, forestry and soils, and tourism's in here now. It's such a diverse, and probably one of our signature divisions in the whole campus.
Yeah, the School of Natural Resources is, as you know, one of the 6 divisions in our college, a division with nearly, at this point, 1,000 students. And as you said, Tim, it's so diverse, right? It's the home of soil science as an academic, program. And as you said, it goes from forestry to wildlife to the soils to the social sciences like parks, recreation, and tourism, environmental sciences, water resources, you name it.
Right.
And atmospheric sciences. It is so diverse. And it was fun for me.
Because it all comes together.
Oh,
it's
all.
Yes.
I used to call our school as the most comprehensive schools of its nature in the country.
In the country.
Because of the breadth as well as the depth of what we covered in the school.
And as always, when you do a great job, other opportunities open up, don't they? and you're asked to lead even bigger.
That is true. That is true.